It's Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
Dave on the board. Today is May the 21st. We're down to just one more week after today in the month of May 2017. And this is the Prairie Monk, your weekly look at the environment and rails and trails and greenways and all sorts of fun stuff happening here in the area and sometimes not even in the area.
This has been a very exciting week. Not totally unusual, but a lot that says that environmentalists and all non-profit agencies try to do a lot of things, and it's not always easy. So let's start with Dave Wood. And David might even know the music that he used to play. He used to be a WEFT, and he had a Captain Freedom program, and I don't know whether he had some people that he played regularly. So I don't know. Do you know Dave's?
I sure don't. He sounds very interesting. When somebody announced on a WEFT email list that he had passed away, there was an outpouring of quite a few folks who actually were old enough to remember him, but he was gone already by the time I got here at 95.
Okay. He was motor mechanic par excellence, and he was also kind of conservative soul, but he was also a liberal in other directions. He joined with a group of people who were objecting to the Vietnam War. It included the co-op and legal aid and an Earthworks Garage, and he was a founder of Earthworks Garage. He could convert a car to a creative car. He would work with motorcycles. He had antique vehicles. I think he must have been in the army and was in the East and picked up a rather valuable car. You can get some of this from his website. Dave Woods, often called Woodsy because he lived most recently in the Villa Grove area and for quite some time lived in a teepee. He had a rough, tough voice, and he was well known to a lot of people. He had 4 children, and he was a loyal early WEFty, and he died fairly quickly. I think of a brain tumor, but I'm not quite as sure about that. He might have had some leukemia too, but we'll miss David. The last time I talked to him was at the antique car show in Urbana, and he was very much Dave Woods, and we will miss him. We need that sort of person to think differently, to think creatively, to inspire people to do things. And even yesterday, when I was at a totally different meeting, somebody came up and paid a lot of accolades to David. He had a motorcycle that had been sitting in his backyard for quite some time, and took it to David, and within moments had it restored. So Monday morning started interestingly. It was predicted to be low rain for a while. Ron Sleater helps us a lot at Pope Prairie. He comes from Decatur. He's has been a chemist. He's retired from being a chemist at ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, and he brings with him herbicide that we zap teasels with, and we get quite a bit of opposition to people who don't want herbiciding. We don't blanket herbicide. We spot herbicide, and Ron does the herbiciding. He has a backpack and brings water and mixes the herbicide. And gradually we've got that 9-acre lot and lots around it, the remnant prairie around it, rather free of teasel, which is a very popular cemetery dried arrangement weed that really takes off. And it's tall, it likes disturbed areas, so fortunately the prairie is fairly firm and it doesn't occupy that quite so much. While Ron was doing that, I took video tape of the general area. The road was going to be a dual highway, so land was bought for a dual highway, but in the interim, 57 was invented, and it went round Tool and took the traffic off of 45, so there was no real need for that extra width of road, but it's been there. It's owned by DOT, the Department of Transportation, and it extends for quite some way, and it parallels an old Route 45 all the way to Paxton, 10 miles. I'm looking to that as a national or state windshield area that could be used for introducing people to prairie or introducing tourists that might be interested in what we have as a ecosystem, which is almost extinct. It's all converted to corn and soybeans. The corridor goes up and over the Bloomington Moraine, so it has some geophysical interest. The moraine is Bloomington Moraine. It's a continental glaciation, and the front side was where the water would, the ice would melt and dribble out to places like Flatville. And so there's a front edge to the moraine that is very wet, and then you rise up through mesic sites and dry sites to a very dry plateau with a blocked perched water table. So you have this height of a moraine, but on the top of it you have a pond, and that has been drained, but it's very typical of where you had aeolian wind-blown material blown across the country. When the glaciers retreated, the wind-blown material came east, and in the if you're going as far north as Kankakee, you have sand dunes there, and a sand dune population of organisms, and you have the adjacency of 45 all the way down to Loda, with a interesting prairie between the old Route 45, which followed the railroad line, which was at Illinois Central at the time. That needs some sort of kiosks here and there to let people know what a prairie is about, and otherwise it just looks like you're driving through a bunch of weeds. So when you get to Loda, you have a cemetery prairie. At Paxton, you have a cemetery prairie, and then there's 10 mile of old Route 45. South of that, there's a segment which goes up the moraine and on top of the perched water table, and that is owned by DOT, and that was what I was photographing, just 1 mile. The old road is used as a area for storing gravel for road works. So the area is used to some extent, but on both ends. So you have a 1 mile segment which has prairie growing on it, and it could be where you could park and walk a mile, or you could actually drive a mile and come out at the other end near our 9 acres of restoration prairie and near remnant prairie. So I photographed that, and hopefully we'll put up a link to that general area, which we would like to encourage the Department of Transportation to think about working on their own territory with a minimal of finance needed to remove some of the Russian olives and the various trees like olives and multiflora rose and a few things like that, and open it up as a prairie demonstration, and perhaps even label a few of the plants and perhaps restore it some. So I spent time writing that document to that extent to a group within the Department of Transportation, where they're doing like other states, requesting that roadside management include a lot of native plants, and we will see if we've got any reaction to that. I came back and on Tuesday dealt with banking. I've taken to wearing cargo pants with many pockets in them because I have lots of information in various places, and including calling cards and checkbooks and things. But I lost 2 checkbooks, and I've noticed that sometimes when I sit down, there are checkbooks on the seat after I've sat down, and I could not find my checkbooks. So eventually I decided to close those checkbooks out, because you have routing numbers and check numbers that can go into the field and wait 2 or 3 years and be zapped. So it's rather important. So I would like to remind people to think a lot about their checkbooks, and I've been to Goodwill since then to install some more cargo pants. And cargo pants come in various styles, and some of them have Velcro on them that allow you to put things in your pockets and have them stay there. Some of them are buttoned, some of them are just open, and some of them are firmer than others, so some of this activity also means that the fabric of those garments have to be fairly strong if you're out there in the field doing things and wearing them out fairly quickly. And light materials don't hold up, and if you try to mend them with a sewing needle, it takes time and energy. And so there's various ways of carrying things. The camera people often have vests with lots of pockets, and they're rather important. In wintertime, they're important because you used to have to keep your film warm, so you had to have it under your armpit to do that. We don't have to do that anymore, but you have to have room for a cell phone and other accoutrements that, like cards, and calling cards are very important because you meet people on the way and they wonder what the devil you're doing, and also you want to tell them what you are doing. So if I encounter a policeman parked somewhere, I will often stop and report in, and those policemen do things like parade down the old 45 concrete road where people tend to drop mattresses and other things untoward. So the police personnel in Piatt, DeWitt, Champaign, Macon County have all been very cooperative about watching the natural areas that we try to maintain. A long conversation about Heartland Pathways funding. Some of the things we are doing and thinking about are multi-million-dollar events, and we don't have a lot of support. We've had generous support from a lot of people, and some particular really essential help, and that is not always available, and you have to understand why, because the people who are donating to a whole lot of different things. When the federal government is having some conniptions and the state government is not yet have a budget in 2 years, there is a lot of problems for nonprofit agencies, including WEFT. It's hard to get the finance, but it's also hard to have people who will be the leaders, and we need leaders. It's difficult times. It rained. Oh, did it rain? But also where David and I sit to put pictures in this radio program, which we convert to TV, I heard some conversation, so I went around to see what was going on. Well, one of the roofs of the nearby buildings, you have to understand that there were 800-foot buildings on Market Street. There were 8 similar buildings on Walnut Street, and there was an alleyway between. Well, the alleyway has been filled in at each end, and the alleyway was actually the drain for water coming off the roof. They're all sloped to that alleyway. Well, when you put a block across the ends, then the water doesn't know where to go. And if you go to the city, you can stand half a dozen people out at various drain holes and places where you can detect things, and you go to your toilet and you put in a dye and see where the dye comes out to see where the drains go to. But the city doesn't. This is old enough that the city doesn't have maps. The key people who put this in the 1850s or wherever are not here any longer, and they were walking dictionaries for their information. The same existed in Urbana. There was one person knew everything, and that is a dangerous situation. And the computer era has helped us no end to be able to define some of this sort of thing and make plans that will carry on. But even that is a problem, because if you know your fiber optics, the fiber optics cable will probably be around for a long time. But the instruments that are on each end are likely to be different in a matter of 3 years or 10 years. So the city has, in its wisdom, decided to maintain a hard copy of all its archives, because this is also a problem. But it's also a great help to be able to do search. David is very good at this. He has taught me how to search for information, and I've cottoned on to some extent. But one of the problems is we have about 2 million documents, and they're not databased very well. They don't have titles. And these days, if you're talking to attorneys, and I am, you're faced with a problem that most attorneys are now working solely on. They may have hard copy too for certain things, but basically they're communicating on the internet, and that means retrieval is tremendously important. Is it Heartland Pathways, or is it HP? Is it how do you define these pieces of information? Is very important. And then you also have to know that there is Facebook and Twitter out there, and although we have 150 one-hour programs up on YouTube that you can access, nobody probably knows that they're very much. So you have to be bold enough to advertise what you're doing, because you have to be a totem pole for what you do. That's not always the case. If you're a British person, you're probably likely to expect other people to promote your well-being, and sort of not manage to promote yourself. But the U.S. way of doing things is that if you do something that you think is worthwhile, you advertise it. And that means you have to be on Facebook and Twitter and Skype, and not always have I been that familiar with the system. David has been tremendously helpful doing that, because he watches over me and sees that I don't get into strife. I would be fossicking around if David weren't there. So it's very, very helpful to have a leadership situation, but then to have backup. So we keep looking for backup people. We've had lots and lots of conversations about this sort of thing. You can have for 50 volunteers, but 50 volunteers needs a leadership to keep those 50 volunteers operating in such a manner that they might come back and be a part of your retinue of board members and assistants. You need some sort of warehouse where you can have equipment, and equipment that may not necessarily be a chainsaw or power equipment or tractors or tandem trucks or hi-hos or whatever. You have to have those people who can work with people who have hand tools and can be just as effective, but in a different way, and they can save a tremendous cost of renting a hi-ho for $100 or $200 a day. And you can do a lot of these things by hand. Not everyone wants to be out there with a sickle and a saw and a herbicide or whatever. So you have to balance all these things together. And you also have to have equipment, and often that equipment comes out of recycling bins, whether it's behind the Lincoln building or wherever. You keep picking up recycling materials that you can use instead of having to go out and buy them. You also have a group of people who bring you things, and that's helpful. Sometimes it is a little demanding because you have to know how to recycle curly fluorescent light bulbs or batteries or spent batteries or things like that, or small pieces of metal, or sometimes things that are quite functional, but they might be a little aged. So you might want to take them to Packer or someone where they have an interest in historic items, but even they will say, we're recycling materials. We're not really a historical museum, so some of your stuff may have to go to a historical museum like the Cattle Bank, where people like T.J. Blakeman are president, and they will accept the spirit and philosophy of something that probably won't sell at a Packer thing. Sometimes there are little things that a Packer will sell, say, for $2 or for 50 cents, or tools or things that are spent by retirement, and so that will help to fund something where someone wants to buy an antique door for $50 or something like that. But you're not going to have a lot of walk-in people who do the $50 bit, because most of the buildings that are going up are new, and so how do you fit in an antique door into a new building? How do you recycle that sort of thing? I got a phone call from Marcy Ridgway, who works with dogs, and she's in Arkansas with a dog family, and there's a seminar there that she likes very much. She's just worked her way through her career in veterinary medicine, and it's always been difficult to be an applied veterinarian, applied being where she fosters dogs, particularly Lassie-type dogs that want to herd cattle or chickens or people, and when they're put into a pound or a survival place, they're prone to get very upset if they're put in a cage and they can't do what they genetically evolved to do. So they bite people, and so then they're put down. So Marcy collects dogs that are in jeopardy for that reason, and teaches them manners, and that may take a month or two, and those dogs go back to people who apply for to be a permanent owner of a dog. That's not easy, because you have to have an owner that will also be able to satisfy the need of a dog to herd cattle or people or whatever. So not everyone gets to be invited to take a foster dog and as a permanent pet. They have to also go through an archival, not an archival, it's an approval to see that there will be a suitable home for a dog.
Like a probation period of some sort?
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's accreditation, I was thinking, just as the same way as you accredit a university or whatever, you accredit people. So that reminds me that the dog sale is coming up. And so Marcy had me take since she was out of town, take a bunch of dog beds and things to the dog sale. This time, the dog sale is in a different place, folks. It usually is at the county fairgrounds, and for some reason or other, it's not there. It's in what was the old IGA store on Florida Avenue in Champaign. And you go right into the back of the IGA to load up. The loading was on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, so the loading period has finished, and now the whole team of people, led by Mayor Payne and Jim Payne, and these items will be have to be classified for their sale price. And that takes a little talent, and you have to do it fairly quickly. And then the sale will be next week, and I don't have the specific dates on it, but those of you who are pet lovers will know how to get there. And it's a very interesting sale. Anything that's left over is dealt with effectively, and I like to encourage that one. Sierra Club had a happy hour. Sierra Club is small. It's sort of John Muir's style, quasi-political organization, and different from Audubon, different from Isaac Walton League, different from the Plant Society. There's about 10 of those different groups around, all different, doing their own things. It's very hard to get them together to under one titular body. They're all doing their own thing. The Lions are doing glasses. Somebody else is doing hearts. So it's very independent, and there are rules to the game. And if you're doing these sorts of things, you need to know that the rules of the game are set up in Springfield or in federal government, and you have a tremendous responsibility to meet those rules, because the people who are administering them are often tremendously knowledgeable about the Charitable Trust Act and what you can do and what you cannot do, and who can donate what and where, and it gets it political to some extent. And it's very difficult for individuals who are creative, like David Wood, or people at the doing art. The Art Council is having forever seminars for people who are artists but don't know diddly about the organization that goes behind the art. And so an excellent artist is often a very good business person. And So they try to do that for nonprofits, and there are a number of these organizations that try to encourage creative people to think about the structure into which they have to belong in order to get tax breaks and the like. If you're in a different setting, you have to where you perhaps are the three people in the basement with a coffee and a donut, and you're putting this sort of stuff together. You don't know about all these things and capital gains and all the rest of it. You almost need an attorney. So that's why when David Woodruff was working, he was working with Earthworks. Those people needed lawyers who could know what they could do to be active and tweak a nose here and there and be able to do it in a friendly manner. It takes talent, and West has been doing that for many, many years, 30-odd years, 35 years, I think. And West is always in jeopardy of not surviving, but somehow it seems to keep it together. And David's been around enough, and he's been in charge of West as manager for a period, and he knows very well what I'm talking about. It ain't easy, folks. So Sierra Club is in the same place. It tends to meet in different places, so you need to be on your computer to know where the meeting is. So this was in one of the downtown recently built bars, and so I enjoyed meeting with people, exchanging ideas. It ranged from people who were lawyers to people who were IT people, instructional people who'd worked with WILL, and knew some of the difficulties that they have. What sort of spectrum do you fit into? Where's your range? What bailiwick can you cover? So I enjoyed doing that. And then we were invited to see a model aquifer. Well, I haven't all the details here, but Laura is, I think she is next door in the old Sears building. Sears and Penny's, everyone moved out to the Market Street Mall, and so there were empty buildings, and there's a exercise bar that next door to some empty Sears Roebuck space. And there's an event each year where people are asked to work with young folk especially to use cardboard, recycle cardboard, and to make creative use of cardboard. It usually runs to a house or a small landscape or different features or items that would reuse cardboard. Sometimes they're cardboard boats. You put them in a lake and see how far you can go before the cardboard gets wet and you sink. Well, she was watching. Her name is Laura. Starts off with K. Case Ullman or something like that. And she's a powerhouse of energy, and she decided that they could do a cardboard aquifer. And she went to the aquifer people, and there was a thought that she might want to make a model 6 feet long. And she said, no, 60 feet long. Wow. Okay. So she took a room that was vacant in Sears next door to her exercise outfit. And they made an aquifer using high school kids, grade school children, and they taught them what an aquifer was, and they had certain assignments. They had to be able to mix with the assignment next to them, so if they got to build an aquifer, then they had to understand their 25 feet or whatever it was, and they had to be compatible with the next 25 feet. And how do you do that? They would take people from different schools and mix them so that they had interaction that way. They'd take disadvantaged people and mix them with other people. They would take ethnic groups that would tend to want to do something creative of their own and allow them to exist as that group, but to express themselves in context with the rest. So the soil underneath got to be paper, brown paper, and then there was a mixture of bottles and circles of rolls. We have big tubes that often get recycled that might be the 3-inch size segment of cardboard, very stable. And so pieces of these represented the rocks and rubble in the aquifer, and above that was the aquifer water made out of something like 20,000 plastic water bottles on end with lights behind so that you could get an idea of the movement of this water through, and they haven't finished this by any means. And we would hope to have Laura on the radio at times. So that was rather wonderful, and well, we will try to have her on. Then at the same time in Taylor Street, there was a Kickapoo fundraiser. Cowboy Monkey and Blind Pig got together, and I don't know whether they made much, but if they did, that's very helpful. And it means that there's more and different groups doing things. So I was rather pleased about this week because there were a lot of those sorts of groups doing other things. I went out to the Kickapoo Trail to see how it was going. I see the Main Street segment between 130 or High Cross Road and Main Street has been developed. We're very jealously looking at that because that used to be a fine remnant prairie, and I'm sad to say that the bulldoze area for that is like, in some cases, 35, 45, and even 50 feet wide, and that I don't think we need that wide to destroy the native vegetation. There's also been some planted trees, ceremonial trees, to make a statement about starting the project, which I'm not very happy about because it was not a tree area. It's trees grown with crud trees that grow quickly. Then, yes, there was I went right through to St. Joe, and very pleased, although a little disappointed that so much remnant prairie has been removed. There'll be reconstruction. Wow. WEF went through some changes. Then Kurt Tucker came in. And Kurt Tucker used to run the Verde Gallery just around the corner on Taylor Street where Blind Pig and Cowboy Monkey were doing their fundraising. I have a little question there. Some of the seating is fairly permanent, and some of the research that goes on in architectural circles says that people need to move their chair or their table. Even if they only move it a half an inch, that they need to do that. So having a very firm concrete or wooden or other stable piece of seating, I always think about that as I go past. Okay. Let's say this is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
Dave on the board, and I'll jump in really quickly to say, if you want to see examples of immovable chairs, go to the Champaign Public Library. They have 4 or 5 chairs that are molded that are just right out in front, and they are very cleverly put such that they always face in such different directions that no matter where the sun is, you could find at least one chair where the sun is behind you, not in your eyes. So there you go. Permanent chairs. So one thing, I don't know if you even have time to talk about this. I just saw something online that the state of Illinois is trying to pass a bill that declares that we have a state wildflower. Do you want to take like 1 minute to talk about what maybe, if you could pick yourself, what the state wildflower was, and then at the end I'll tell you what they're talking about. What would you make it if you could simply say, ding, here's the state wildflower?
I might make it purple gentian.
I was thinking like big blue stem or something like that.
Big blue stem is fairly common in a lot of states. So it is a very well-known icon for prairie.
Right.
So, it might be that you need the cardinal bird is also fairly common.
So purple gentian not only is a wildflower, but is relative. We're one of the largest harbingers. What harbinger?
Well,
that's wrong. Habitats for it.
We know where we have 10 plants and whatnot, but it is a fairly rare plant that is very interesting. I'm not sure. Your comment is germane. You need an icon that people are aware of, so it might be better to have something like big blue stem.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll tell you. What they're currently saying is, let's make it milkweed. So people do know.
There are several different milkweeds, and that doesn't always please farmers because they've grown up cutting the milkweed out of the rows of corn and soybeans. Your mention of the library reminds me that I was at Monticello and went to the new library, which is built out of town a little bit. It's a $3 million donation there, and I took photographs, and it's rather an interesting library. It's right up against our prairie, where there is purple gentian, and there's a small 10-acre lot alongside it, which could almost be a library prairie. So I was pleased to be there. And I talked to Tim Hayes, who is on the city council, and the city council has been having its ups and downs. This is Monticello. And so he's retired from the city council, but we know each other pretty well, mainly from going to meetings. But he's always been willing to come out and have a look at the prairie that we're talking about, which not everyone understands. Well, I have lots of stuff here. Kurt Tucker came by, and I mentioned that, but that was interesting. His partner is they're from New Mexico, Flagstaff area, and she's been organizing youth orchestras, and we've been talking about the youth orchestra here, and she's managed to get together a lot of people. And once again, she is a musician, but not a full-time musician. Her forte is to be one of these organizers that get people together. And so we talked quite a bit and enjoyed each other's company at Cafe Coburg around the corner. It rained more. And I have people at the back, so we have, I'm not sure whether I spoke about this already, but we have water that flows into that area and sometimes ends up in various basements. Saturday morning there was a meeting at CH&W. I went outside and it was pouring rain all the way to Monticello, and the fields were full of water. And
you should tell folks.
Take a while to dry out.
Sorry, you should tell folks what CH&W stands for. I may be the only one who knows.
Yes, it's a Champaign, Havana, and Western Historic Railroad, and it's an attempt. We've been together for about 5 years. An attempt to extend Monticello Railroad Museum trains to Champaign, so that you would have some niches in Champaign that are different. And one of the things about downtown Champaign is that it's gentrifying, and you've got apartments everywhere. But sometimes you need little things like that pocket prairie or a train or something else that is different that you can share with others. Sometimes we've talked a little bit about pulling down obsolete mall buildings and putting in apartments that have room for you to grow a tomato or work with a dog or ride your bicycle without being killed. So I got the CHW meeting, and we talked for best part of 3 hours. Did very formal things because Tom Scott, the Scott family has had a lot to do with the Railway Museum at Monticello, which has really done very well, and they've just bought, I think, 47 acres of ground that allow them to expand or at least not be railed in with development. So that was rather expensive, and we discussed that some. We discussed the fact that we're re-railing between Whiteheath and Seymour with the hope of bringing trains in to Champaign. We need a bridge over Camp Creek, so we had discussed the Wind Prairie through Arcola, which has bridges that will come out, and can we buy Boreberg or steal them for nothing and bring them up here to allow something like a heavy engine to move over, and believe me, if you put a steam engine across it, it's heavy. So that was formal, but very pleasing, and we're in the same boat of how do you get this information to people? How do you share it with others? Some things you don't want to really talk about because they're the sort of things you get together with 3 people and you do it, and it works. If you have a lot of people involved, then you can have discussions forever and it won't happen. So some things happen off the seat of the pants. So when do you do seat of the pants and when do you do that? Correct. It's a difficulty. Where do you get funding from and who does what? Is interesting. Then around the corner was Land Trust. Land Conservation Foundation, and they have 2 miles of levee. Let me explain you what a levee is. It's an embankment made on the side of a river so that you can take the bottomlands and grow crops on them without being inundated with floodwater. So a lot of the land along the rivers has been levied, and the Land Trust, mainly Bruce Hannon, and the CEO for that is Deanna Glosser, but all sorts of other people have been involved, and they were all there under a tent. So Tim Johnson was speaking, and various other people from the community were applauding Bruce Hannon's involvement. Early on, they managed to stop a Oakley Reservoir, which was going to inundate a lot of Allen Park. So Bruce Hannon and Paxton and a whole bunch of people invited people like William O. Douglas, who was a Supreme Court judge, to come and look over this area, and the dam was not put in. So Bruce has continued. He's a local yokel. He comes from Ivedale, has been a professor of geography and engineering, and that was very pleasant. We walked the corridor. It was alive with mosquitoes, and but you could see where they've now drained that reserve area that was where you actually had to pump the water out over the levee. So now they put drains through it so the water comes in and it goes out. Sometimes it goes out too quickly and you have fish involved. So next door to this levee there are eagles, and the eagles when the water goes down, the eagles get the fish that are caught, and so there's a rookery there for other birds, and so we walked that, a little slippery here and there, and we talked to people, and it was a communication, and I enjoyed that no end. And met up with a lot of people. Some of them went back to our Reading the Landscape days. Adrian DeWitt was there, and we were all getting on. And so it was interesting to interact with the people who have actually funded some of this and people who approve it. And it will be an added thing to the whole corridor up to as far as Muhammad. I've talked to Kent, I think it is, the guy who writes in the News Gazette, and he has a degree in PhD in English language, but he's working with the College of Agriculture, and he interprets the landscape very well, and is on WILL, on the News Gazette, and he is almost a mentor for other people who want to do that sort of cross-disciplinary thing. I took off and went surveying the various aspects of Heartland Pathways, because there may be a drainage problem, there may be a difference of opinion, there's a planting of things. So I headed from Cisco to Weldon, where we have an invasion there and a costly surveying that we've been doing. And as of yet, the soybeans hasn't been planted. So I have the evil intent of going out and saying, putting in signs that say, no trespassing. It won't make a difference, but because we have to go to the court to get a court injunction. But this is why you have to have the help of the state and federal governments, because it's very costly to do that sort of challenge. And farmers have enough money to be able to challenge you and have their arguments too. So I came back, and George Timmons complained he would turn his equipment on our railroad right away, and as a result of the disturbance, you get weed species growing. And they asked me if they could mow that, and I said, no, you're disturbing it. It's your problem. But instead of doing the mowing, they planted the area to corn. So in the area of the land, corn goes right up to the corridor, which can be a trail. So we're hoping that the opening of the Kickapoo Trail will start to alert people to the value of trails and the like. I had to keep looking around. I went to Shady Rest to see that things were working there. I was alerted to the fact that there was a hi-ho sitting at Seymour. I checked it out. I don't know why it's sitting there, but always when there's a hi-ho sitting somewhere, you're wondering what is going to happen next. We've got a lot of visualization to do because I took pictures at all these places. And David has been tremendously helpful in putting these things down. We haven't done too many links, but we might have a link in this. I downloaded my cell phone photographs at 3 in the morning, and I looked out the front door, and there was just a load of rain coming down. And there were two young women totally drenched, running through this rain. And then this morning I had someone who comes to the Pocket Prairie, and I'm a little uncertain of what I'm saying, but he was looking for help, and he's a very genuine person. I know him, and he's trustworthy, and unfortunately I'm not in a situation to help, but we had a long discussion, so I was, and it was a tough discussion to some extent. And so as I came to do this program, I was a little on edge because of that sort of situation. But we have to realize that as we gentrify, we also have to know that the black community in this town and the Hispanic community and others are having a very hard time. Slavery has not left town. There's too much. There's a lot of alternate thinking here, and how do we deal with it? And so that was happening just a few moments before I came to do this program. Well, so I think we're to the end of our program today. Thank you for listening. Get involved if you can. Provide some help money to WEFT or whoever else if you can. And this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. As always, the views and opinions expressed here are solely those of the speakers